And good evening from me too. A very warm welcome and thank you for joining us and our guest speakers to talk about the topic that concerns all of us, the future of our city. But first of all, I want to thank Bath Royal Scientific and Literary Institution for convening this event. I'm thrilled to have such an inspiring panel with us tonight. And I know we are going to be in for a fascinating discussion. Betty has already mentioned our topic this evening is reimagining Bath. The pandemic has impacted all of us and our lives profoundly. It has exposed fault lines in our society and turned many of our assumptions upside down. Here in Bath, for example, it has shown how dependent we have become on tourism and hospitality, sectors that were both very hard hit. COVID has touched our schools and education, our economy and the high street, the way we interact with each other and how we interact with all parts of our city. And tonight we will consider how we can build Bath on Bath's tremendous assets and our potential to manage these profound changes in a way that is sustainable and inclusive. The extent to which we are prepared to be bold, to be swift, to be open-minded and imaginative, and work together in new ways will determine our success. So joining me this evening are three local leaders. Betty has already mentioned them, who will share their perspectives with us. I will introduce each of our speakers and give them the floor for about 10 minutes each. And then we will have a Q&A session. Please put your questions into the chat and I will select them. I hope that we can get through all of the questions, but please don't hesitate to put your questions into the chat and I will read them out on your behalf. So that is now the cue for Geoff Rich. Geoff, I'm so pleased to have you with us. You were born in this area and have lived here for 25 years. You are a conservation architect with a global career, managing a large award-winning practice. You have worked on the Bath Abbey footprint project and are the driving force behind TEDxBath. Geoff, it's just wonderful to have you. And I understand you're sharing our screen with everybody and while you're talking. So over to you.
Thanks, Vera, and I hope you can see my screen there okay. And it's a real privilege to be invited to be part of the panel this evening. So thank you very much. And I'd just like to share a few images, if I may, as I talk. And firstly, responding on the idea of inspirations in Bath. And yes, you're right. I've lived in Bath for the last 25 years, since starting my current job at Feilden Clegg Bradley Studios in 1996, which is a company which was formed in Bath in 1978. I studied architecture at Newcastle University and then came to Bath. And when I joined Feilden Clegg Bradley Studios, there were 27 of us here in Bath, and we're now nearly 200 people across 5 offices in the UK. And we have a reputation for design quality, for creative reuse of historic buildings and low carbon design. And I'm based in our Bath office, which is on Tollbridge Road, and I'm there as a managing partner. And we work across all kinds of projects and sizes, and these are some of our recent projects in Bath. And I work mainly as a conservation architect, so most of my work is with historic buildings or new design for historic sites, both in Bath and beyond. Now, although I moved back to Bath in 1996, I was born locally in North Somerset, so I grew up here and I've known Bath all my life. And in fact, both my grandfathers and one of my great-grandfathers, as seen in this picture, were coal miners in the North Somerset coalfield. Sadly, they all died way too young with lung problems associated with coal mining and before I was born, so I didn't get to meet any of them. And as such, I feel quite strongly that Bath needs to realise and remember its opportunity to inspire everyone, both in Bath and across all of the B&NES communities. Now, I've no doubt that the city has the ability to inspire all of us, and I think it's up to us to find the ways to maximise this sense of inspiration. And personally, I'm sure my own decision to study architecture in the first place was from some kind of subliminal inspiration from the historic buildings and landscape as a child. And as you mentioned, I've had the real privilege to work on the Bath Abbey Footprint project for the last 10 years, which is now completing this month. And in fact, I wrote my undergraduate dissertation about Bath Abbey as a student about 30 years ago. So it's been a dream come true to have the opportunity to work on such an amazing building. Now, as well as being the biggest and perhaps the most inspirational of historic buildings in the city, it also represents 2,000 layers or 2,000 years of history in its layering. And this drawing shows the relationship of today's building in black, laid on top of the Norman Cathedral, so 1,000 years old, in orange, and laid on top of the Roman archaeology below in yellow. And what's particularly amazing, you can note here in the West End, the 2,000-year-old tholos of Roman Bath, which is thought to be located directly below the water in the font. And we know through the project that in the black area there are around 8,000 bodies buried beneath the floor in the Abbey itself. So the Footprint project has brought the Abbey up to date and ready for the next 150 years of its life, both within the Abbey and by re-employing some of the amazing vault spaces surrounding the building. And it's involved the careful lifting and repairing of every single one of 2,000 stones in the Abbey's floor over the last 3 years. It's employed technology in its archaeological excavation and recording. And we've discovered and learned some amazing things we didn't know about the building, including this pigmented 14th century floor. And it's also delivered a unique new sustainable heating system by using the heat from the hot water in the Roman drain, which you can see here running across about 5 meters below ground, the UK's only natural hot spring water, to serve a new low carbon underfloor heating system for a Grade 1 listed building right in the middle of the World Heritage City. And this is just a sneak preview of some of the wonderful facilities now being delivered, both underground and a view of the fully renewed sacred and social space for gatherings of 1,000 people or more, right in the very heart of our city. So how do we want to use this inspirational space in the next decades? And then also over the past few years, I've been very excited to be working voluntarily as part of the TEDxBath project team. And we're seeking to bring some really inspirational speakers with powerful and personal stories for audiences of all ages in Bath. We've been growing every year, and this year our event theme is interconnected, which seems particularly appropriate following the pandemic. And it's going to bring 12 really amazing inspirational speakers to the city on the 18th and 19th of November. And I've got no doubt that they're going to offer real interest for people of all ages and backgrounds across themes, including environment, our response to the COVID pandemic, social equity and community. And this year, we're also establishing some exciting new partnerships with our 2 universities and Bath College, and we're planning to host some live watch parties. So it'd be great if other people would like to come and join us. And I think too, as well as agility in a city like Bath, we need vision, ambition, perseverance, and perhaps most importantly, encouragement of each other to have the bravery to make changes. Although I'm a conservation architect, I really believe that conservation is a process of managing change rather than a process of managing preservation. And so I think we need to have the confidence to experiment with temporary or pop-up ideas in our heritage cities that can change perceptions, and reversibility and using the skills of designers and creative people who are interested in social change in our in our city through spaces in between buildings is really important. And I think the Forest of Imagination has been a great example of how design and creativity can change perceptions about some of the most cherished spaces in the city and inspire people to have fun. And I think too, as this 18th century painting shows, Bath was built for socializing by the Georgians. And so I wonder, whether we should think about really having some fun in public spaces like Parade Gardens, where we have literally all of the ingredients for a smashing space. City centre site, historic riverside, thermal hot spring just below the grass, communal gardens, a natural amphitheatre, a medieval east gate, and loads of underused underground spaces. And I think, it's a wonderful space to have some fun and maybe to work with a bit of agility and a bit of risk taking and fun seeking.
That sounds. I think nobody could deny that. I mean, the problem is always around conservation. How much do you preserve and how much do you recognize? Can be adapted to modern use and modern enjoyment of the city. So our theme today is about reimagining the city. So nothing is built in stone. Well, a lot of things are built in stone, but you can move the stones around. And I'd say, whoever hasn't been in the Bath Abbey and has seen the footprint project, a lot of change. But actually, if you go into it, and I actually worship at Bath Abbey, it's actually also surprising how everything that I enjoyed about the building, the lightness, the colours, and the space, that's still very much there. Some of the interiors have gone, but they were also of their time. They weren't even original. And I think we have to be sometimes brave, as you said, to not sort of stick too much with everything that is old and say, well, not everything that is old was great anyway. And if it is in the way of us enjoying the city and having fun, then we have to rethink about it. Just one last thing. Bath is not just a city in Somerset. We are a global city. What are the implications for us to build for the future?
Yeah, I do think first and foremost we need to remind ourselves of the immense privilege we all have of being lucky enough to be in or near Bath. I've been very fortunate to be able to appreciate that through working internationally on heritage projects. And I think that's given me a real appreciation of how important our city is and also the opportunity that we have to present Bath as a progressive city, progressive heritage city internationally. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to speak about the Bath Abbey project at a conference in New York, and I faced the audience very nervously at the start, and I asked if anyone had been to Bath or Bath Abbey, and I was absolutely amazed when about half the audience put their hands up and told me how much they loved Bath and how much they loved the Abbey. And as a visiting lecturer at the university in Bath, it's amazing to see how many people from all over the world choose to study or teach in our city. And only last week I had the chance to show around some first-time visitors who'd just been exiled from Kabul in Afghanistan. And they were so amazed by Bath and said they left feeling inspired to continue with their work despite the challenges in Afghanistan. So I think, we have this amazing opportunity to see what's amazing about the city, but also to be progressive in the way that we manage and present it back to the world. And finally, just one last point on TEDxBath. One of our speakers, I'm pleased to say, in the red box there is a Brazilian interpreter named Evandro Magalhães, who will be coming to us from New York City to speak on the power of global communication through language. He's a former chief interpreter for the United Nations, and he's enabling all of our speakers to be live translated into the world's main languages and British Sign Language. So again, we're aiming to host or offer Bath as a host city, which is truly interconnected and offering thoughts back to the world in whichever language you can approach us. I think it's very interesting. I mean, if you compare the Abbey and the Roman Baths, for example, the Roman Baths receives around 1 million visitors a year, and the Abbey receives less than half that number, despite its front door being 30 or so meters from the Roman Baths. The Abbey has a different ticketing policy to the Roman Baths, and I think it could drive more income if it chose to sell tickets to its visitors, or perhaps recognised its potential as a world-class heritage asset in the city, as well as being, an incredibly important sacred space in the life of the city. But I do think it's worth it, and sometimes we undervalue, I think, our sense of worth to international visitors, and I think sometimes we take for granted these really priceless heritage assets and social assets on our doorsteps. And sometimes we just don't create the right vehicles for us to offer donations or participation. I really think they're worth the money, and I really think there are people that are willing to contribute in greater numbers given the right invitation.
Well, Geoff, we need to move on, but I'd say definitely the Abbey needs to open itself to more people, and maybe there's a degree of threshold angst for people who think, it's a church. At the same time, I'd say the church, remember Jesus, who sort of went into the temple and said this should be a place of prayer, not of commerce. So this is all the sales that you could make money out of, or whatever. So the commercialization of a space like the Abbey is probably an issue for the church leaders. But let's park this here and go and talk and hear from Richard. Richard, it's so good to see you as always. I've already said, you are, the money man, or the purse holder in the council. You're the councillor for Walcott Ward and deputy leader of B&NES Council, and your title is cabinet member for economy and resources. As chair of the Economic Recovery Board, ensuring a flourishing future for our city is at the forefront of your mind, I know. Please give us a snapshot of what has changed since March 2020.
Thank you, Vera. Well, good evening, everyone. Well, it won't have escaped anybody's notice that a lot of things have changed in the last 18 months. Before the first lockdown last year, the situation in Bath was that tourist visitor numbers were increasing every year. And I think arguably to a level that was no longer sustainable for the size of the city and our ability to manage the numbers of tourists. We've seen too many cars, too many coaches, and the impact on the local transport system has been quite testing at times. The other thing I think is already been referred to a little bit, but is the very close dependence of the business community on those tourists. And I'm afraid that model has crumbled slightly over the last 18 months. What has happened actually in the local economy is that the economy had geared itself up to those visitors. So the sort of businesses that succeeded with large numbers of tourists clearly couldn't succeed without them. And what that has done is to drive upwards underlying commercial rents in the city to a level that is unsustainable. And to illustrate that, what has happened since the pandemic hit us is that commercial rents in the city have fallen between 40 and 50%. And that very few prospective tenants now are prepared to take long leases because they are still worried about risk for their investments. We've heard that the numbers of people visiting the Roman baths and the pump rooms have dropped, and that has a direct impact for the council. We have lost millions of pounds of income, which actually provides services to people, our local residents. And the other thing that has happened is that our own commercial property, we are one of the largest landlords in Bath, has taken a severe hit. We are currently owed £7 million by tenants, and some of that we will never see back. And those are real losses to to our budgets, but also to the services we provide to local people. So that's very serious. And my own view has been for the last year that it will take at least 5 years to see any return to pre-pandemic levels. We had to go through a process of borrowing money from ourselves, taking money from reserves to get us through last year, and that has to be repaid. So we are going to see a very slow recovery in the council's finance over the next few years. So it's bad news all round, but I think this is an absolutely massive opportunity. And I was just preparing a kind of quick checklist of trying to remind ourselves what were the good things about the pandemic and what were the bad things. And you may not all agree with this list, but this is my list. I think the slower pace of life was actually good for people. I think the rushing around, the trying to do things at speed, trying to cram too many things in was not good. I think that was good to see a slower pace of life. There was undoubtedly less consumption, and we have to be a society that consumes less in the future. We cannot continue consuming at the rate we have done for the last 50 years. We've seen fewer cars on the road, and for many people, the chance to work from home with the grind of commuting has been a really positive thing. And one of the things I noticed was birdsong last year. And that's something I've not heard in Bath for many years. A lot of birdsong last year. So that was all good. What wasn't so good, I think for many people who are single or isolated, I think their mental health suffered. I think the isolation was not good for them. And we know that the damage to schooling and learning in general has been a very negative experience. And we're also seeing, although this has bounced back quicker than I expected, an abandonment of public transport and an increase in private car use. But that does seem to be bouncing back a bit, and I've seen more confidence in people using buses particularly, so that's all very good. And just a quick word about confidence in the business sector. There is actually now incredibly strong, I mean, some businesses have clearly disappeared. Shut up shop, will never return. But there is incredibly high confidence from the business community to take those vacancies. We are seeing, and I know St John's, who are the other big landlords in the city, are seeing really strong interest in units that we have. And actually the test those prospective tenants are applying is this location good? Do I have confidence in the future of the city? And I think by and large, the answer is yes to that question. So we're seeing very strong interest for vacant units, actually higher than we have done for many years. And we have a very low number of voids now where we have no tenants in prospect. So that's all very good things. But the last point perhaps to just make on this really is just to comment a bit about traffic. This is actually quite a concern to me because, as everybody knows, we have a clean air zone covering Bath, and the council is committed to publishing the figures about how that is going, and we did that for the first time about 2 months ago, and we're going to be publishing those figures every quarter. And at the moment, I would say the jury is out on whether Bath will meet its clean air targets. I think there's a good chance we will. But equally, it wouldn't take much to knock us off course. And there are some spots in the city where the pollution is still stubbornly high. But the closure of Cleveland Bridge has slightly distorted the traffic, so we need to see a bit longer. So, that's kind of my assessment of how we've done over the last 18 months. But I'm reasonably optimistic about the future.
Thank you, Richard. That were some very good insights, your worries, but also it's good to know that it looks like there's a strong bounce back. That reflects, of course, national figures as well and some buoyant sort of commentaries from the government. Although a lot of people say, well, the last bit to recover to pre-COVID levels is probably the hardest and the most difficult. And sometimes these sort of last percentage points are are often the ones that make the difference between a good life or not such a good life. And of course, you know, the one thing that I thought was interesting, and since our theme tonight is reimagining Bath, not sort of going back to what was there before, is very much, you know, how can a council direct, you know, help us to go in a particular direction that sort of leaves out, you know, gets us back to the good things, but leaves out the things that were actually worth improvement, but we're stubbornly there, like too many cars, you know, too much consumerism. You know, what can a council do to gently get its citizens on the way to a more sustainable city?
Well, the key thing there was the last point you finished on, which was actually, if we carry people with us, we can achieve effective change that is lasting. If we don't carry people with us, then that's much more difficult. And I think in areas where people don't really want to see that change, and I would say car use is one of those, we are, as a nation, extremely wedded to our cars. We're very reluctant to think about other solutions. And that's actually the biggest challenge, I think, for Bath as a city. If you look at comparable cities around the world which have this concentration of heritage, you will very rarely see them as car-dominated as ours. I mean, a few years ago, I went to Bologna for a short stay, and one of the striking things about Bologna is they close the city centre every weekend completely to vehicles, and it's handed over to the people. And my God, it is a wonderful place when that happens. And there are many other cities who are doing the same. So there is a world without reliance on private cars, but I know it's an incredibly contested subject. And some, you know, you're either one way on one side or the other of the argument. So I think that is a big challenge. I was going to say a little bit about some of the big changes that are in train, and there are some, actually, it's worth registering that people can actually contribute to right now. One thing the council is doing is to completely revise many of its planning policies. And some of you would say, well, why is that particularly important? Well, it's so important for setting the agenda for the future. And instead of building a house where a 4-bedroom house where we require 4 parking spaces, we could find ourselves in a situation where actually where our policy is to have no parking spaces, depending on the location of the development. So these are quite big changes. And what we are trying to do is to weave the overarching thing that all of us have got to think about, which is our climate is changing at an unsustainably fast rate. And if we don't do something about it, us and our children, our children's children, are really going to suffer in the future. So we have to get real about this, and we have to start putting things in place that reverse that carbon increase. So, you know, a figure for the audience, work we did 2 years ago has identified that in Bath North East Somerset, over 1/3 of carbon dioxide emissions are from cars. That's 1/3. That's one area where we have some control. The other 1/3 comes from the houses that we all live in, because British houses are notoriously poor for energy conservation and heat retention. So there's a big problem there, and that actually cannot be funded by the council. And the remaining emissions are from the activities of businesses. So we can do something about some of those things, and we can all use cars if we have them less, and we can do those kind of things. But we have to weave that climate emergency stuff into what we do. So the invitation to all of you on the call today is you can respond to those planning policies. They are on public consultation now, right now, and they are really important things for the future. And one of those, and this may come up in this discussion, is that we are looking to limit the way speculative developers have built purpose-built student accommodation in the city. For far too long, this has become the cash cow for many developers. And what it's done is it's actually come at the expense of the development of very valuable land for housing for local people. And that creates its own problem, because if there is not enough housing at the right price, at a range of prices for all sectors of society, we end up in a situation where land values rocket and people have to commute into the city to work, and that creates the transport problems. So these are really quite important policies, and I urge you to look at them and digest them, and if you want to comment on them, do so, because these will end up in a public inquiry at some point early next year, but they will set the scene. Yeah.
Richard, because people can't see the chat, can you just very slowly repeat how people can actually access the local plan consultation, because that's very important. So anybody who wants to contribute, get your pens ready, and Richard will just very slowly read out how you access the consultation.
Well, it's very easy. You go to the council, the front page of the council's website, and there is a button that says "Have Your Say." You press on that, and it will tell you about consultations that are live, and all the planning policies come up in that. It's very easy to find, two or three clicks. But if you say that, I did that the other day, and I thought, and I've been a councillor for 10 years, I thought it was ever so slightly complicated. So you go into the council's website, you click on Your Say, you click on consultation, and then you click on local plan, correct? Yeah, because the council is consulting on many things at a time. So the particular planning policies are all in one part of the website, and you can go through them. There are about five separate documents relating to changes in policy. But these are really important. Obviously, they don't do anything for development that is already being built. But what they do is to set the direction for the future. So it's very important, that people respond to that. If you can't find them, you can email me and I will send you links.
Yes.
So, we want people to respond.
Yeah, and it's only until Thursday the 8th. So, hurry and make your comments quickly. I remember as a local councillor, people wanted to object to a planning application somewhere, and then they found that the principle of development had already been established through the local plan. So something that happened before any direct planning application was on the table. So for the long-term future, these local plan consultations are very, very important. And unfortunately, many local people and constituents don't notice that. So hurry, you've got 4 days until the consultation closes, but it is incredibly important. Sue, thank you for waiting. I thought it was important we got this out of the way. We've run a little bit over time, but I think it is absolutely fascinating to hear from Richard. So let me introduce our final speaker. Sue, we've had discussions with you on public forums before, and it is such a pleasure to see you. You're the Vice-Chancellor of Baspar University, and let's start with education, which is one of our city's strengths. We've got two universities and a college. So Sue, tell us a little bit about the challenges and the possible good things we can take into the future from the pandemic.
Thanks, Vera, and good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see so many friends and so many new acquaintances in this colloquium. Education. Well, I think in a way, Richard just mentioned one of the things that we're all very aware of in the centre, which is that students are a bit of a problem. And I'm sure that for lots of us, that's as far as you get when you think about the educational ecosystem in Bath. So I guess what I'd like to do is encourage you to see beyond that. If we could box away students and not worry about them too much. The University of Bath is one of the internationally leading universities on science, biochemistry, sport, computing. Baspar University has a national and international reputation in creativity and teaching the arts and humanities. And Bath College is one of the absolutely central local providers of the kind of practical skills that help people to get jobs. I think we're all brilliant by ourselves, but we could all be a lot better if we're brought together. And what I really want to do in this sort of space is say, we're at your service. We're at the service of you, the people of Bath, to help the city get better from the pandemic. Bath has been incredibly inventive and incredibly creative ecosystem. It's been a city of the imagination for the last 2,000 years. And what we have now are lots and lots of evidence of that in the heritage that we carry, and maybe not enough confidence in that creative process. Although, you know, what Geoff was saying is absolutely great examples of the way in which that creativity is being brought to bear. But I would say the first thing that you should do is demand of us, the education providers, that we sweat our assets a bit more. We don't just teach undergraduates or graduate students. One example that I'm thinking of is the work that Penny Hay did with Forest of Imagination, where this year with Geoff's company and with Grant Associates, they brought a living tree to the Egg Theatre. So if you have a kid who's at school in Bath, chances are in the last 3 or 4 weeks, they went to the Egg and explored this image and interactive space around sustainability and climate change for themselves. And we were able to bring an internationally renowned creative artist to Bath through an educational entity. Education can help people, but we need to use it for more imaginative ways than just teaching undergraduates. Another example would be the way that we and the Institute of Coding are working with the RUH to address their digital challenges. They've got phenomenal IT and a huge amount of people, a number of people in the workforce who don't know how to use it. Probably the same is true wherever you work as well. And that digital gap is something that's filled with human upskilling. It's not filled with any more technology. So asking more of your universities and colleges will help the town recover, but also bringing us together. So we're just signing a civic university agreement with the college and Bath University that pledges that we all work together. But the important thing here is we don't work for our own agenda, we work for Richard. So the civic university agreement is focused on economic recovery within Bath. We're Richard's servants in that respect. And similarly, we've been working with Richard and with other members of Bath, with North East Somerset Council, on the big bid to bring the Fashion Museum into the centre of Bath, and perhaps the back end of the Fashion Museum into an area of Bath that will really extend the range that tourists cover and therefore reduce the intensity of that tourist footprint. So education in Bath is key, but it's not just people sitting in classrooms and then going and have parties. It's 3 or 4 educational entities that can really help with post-pandemic recovery.
Thank you, Sue. We have had lots of interesting thoughts from all of you. I'm just sort of wondering, you and I, we share a passion for culture and the arts in Bath. Baspar University is a key driver, and we've seen many exciting initiatives that are on the table. For example, putting culture in the centre of our recovery, or ideas to how to develop Western Ireland and the project looking at Bath as a city of imagination. Tell us more about it.
How long have you got? Well, actually about 2 minutes, haven't you? I mean, culture isn't for anything, but it defines who we are. And it's amenable to be brought into our service in developing the city as we want it to develop. It doesn't corrupt the idea of culture for its own sake, to also make use of it. So, I mean, I would just do a call out to the wonderful Stephen Taylor at Bath Bridge. He's been working with the council to define a cultural strategy for Bath, to actually say, you know, if we could do anything we wanted, what would we do over the next few years? And in that forum, he has been kind of curating ideas around creative centres in Western Ireland, as you say, as the bus company moves out. We've been talking about ways that we can, and again, it's through the planning consultation that Richard was talking about, enable people to set up their own creative industries, to set up small entrepreneurial entities that might help the city. And Baspar University, we're now going to sponsor somebody for a year to work that cultural strategy up, to talk to all the creatives in Bath and to try and find the big ideas that we really want to put ourselves behind. Culture is also helpful if it can be bilingual, if it can cross into that speaking the language of business. So, you know, Richard was talking about bringing confidence back into the city centre. One of the examples that I'd give is a cultural entity called Little Lost Robot, which is this amazing creative entity set up by Ruby Jennings and Joseph Welch, they've been sort of setting up their robotics in an empty shopfront in Milsom Street. They're absolutely fascinating. You see people kind of looking in the windows when those installations were there. It's great because it's cheering up. It's something to think about. It's something to enjoy. But it's also bringing confidence back into the city centre. So it's culture for its own sake, but also being used as part of that recovery programme that the council is sustaining for Bath. And I think, you know, one of the very exciting things now is that culture has a central role in redeveloping Bath. It's not a nice to have that you put on afterwards. It's not something you do in the evening after you finish your day of work. It's something that might actually conform to the future of work, might identify the future of the city. And that possibility is what particularly Penny Hay and to an extent I and we at Baspar are calling the city of imagination. What if we saw Bath not as a city of heritage, but a city of the ideas that created that heritage and generated that concept and that confidence for the future, that if we can enact that idea of a city of imagination, we could do anything we want.
So one of the things that maybe previous generations weren't so good about was inclusion. There's a new buzzword or, you know, a new aspiration that we all have. I certainly do. What would you say? You know, what are the opportunities? What are the challenges about inclusion?
It's absolutely critical, isn't it? If we're going to represent our own generation and no one else's, that we hear everyone's voice. And, you know, ideally, Bath would share its ideas, all the ideas from, let's say, the whole of Somerset, or maybe the whole of Somerset and the whole of Ethiopia, where we have such strong links. Or maybe we should just aspire to share ideas between BA1 and BA2, because they really don't talk to one another as much as they do. I'd do a real call out for someone like Rennie Jacobs and the B&Bath network, that there are already nascent solutions here that we can all support and amplify and bring on. There are ways that education can help. I mean, we're working with the Institute of Coding. We're delivering 400 places on digital boot camps. 96% of the applicants are women. So we're reskilling a whole generation of women with degrees to move into the digital and cyber areas that generally they're very underrepresented in. We're supporting our own graduates to stay in Bath, particularly graduates at the University of Bath are much more diverse as a population than the city is itself. If we can hold on to them, if we can listen to them and encourage them, then that really starts to change things as well. And I think the secret is that we as a council, as Brilsey, as, you know, representatives of the people in Parliament or locally, as educational entities, we hear everybody. We don't hear people because they're white or male or senior or privileged. We listen to everybody because there's a really good chance that the idea we need for the future of Bath isn't where we might expect it to be or might have expected it to be in the past. And I think that's a challenge that all of us should take part in sorting out.
If I was playing devil's advocate, but I hear it so often, or I feel it so often, the fear that, you know, if you're opening everything up to questioning of the past and, you know, reinterpreting what has been sort of seen as some sort of certainties about Britain and its place in the world, are we losing something? Could we lose something? Is there a risk that some of what made Britain and gave it its identity was a degree of certainty of its sort of future and or of its place in the world? Can you in any ways share a fear that something might get lost if we undermine too much of what we see as what we always knew?
There's always that risk, isn't there? But if you think about that first slide that Geoff showed of the cathedral and those 2,000 years of history, all of it phenomenal, the sense of identity of the people living in each of those layers was completely different. Identity is malleable, and if it's not malleable, there's a risk that we don't pick up the nuances or enjoy thinking about the past in different ways. And I think really the challenge is for people who are over-identifying themselves with a fixed identity of the past, but there is no such thing as a fixed identity of the past. There's no singular narrative of what happened. Even the archives are composed of things that were considered worth keeping. That's why working class voices are underrepresented, or female voices, or black voices. It doesn't mean they were unimportant. And so a fair challenge to the identity we conceived when we were children might enable us to be more complete as adults rather than more challenged as the children we used to be, I think.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you for that thoughts of yours. I mean, I personally would also say that you know, the more we include, the richer we become. And that a lot of the past can have been quite selective and just shut things out that actually by opening that up and including it would actually make us all richer. But, you know, there are lots of people who are unfortunately worried and fearful about it. And I think it is always important to also to listen to those who are fearful. If we don't, then we create this sort of ding dong and culture wars that I don't like to see, and I don't think it would be very useful for the future of our city either. But anyway, thank you. Let's move on to the Q&A sessions. I had a number of interesting questions, and I think because we probably won't have time for everybody to respond to every question, I will select who I pose the question to. So the first one is from Philip, and he says, and I direct it to Richard, how can Bath become known for the 21st century architecture as well as the Romans? Once we've knocked down the buildings for the Southgate Centre, there was briefly a lovely open space we could have looked down on from Baspar Station. Do we need more open spaces? Do we need the Southgate Centre?
Well, the question has picked on one of my strong areas of opinion. I am not one of those people who says that the future vision of Bath has got to be modern buildings of dubious quality covered in Bath stone. I'm all for interesting architecture because I think that very good modern architecture can sit perfectly along very old buildings if it's designed properly. Unfortunately, we have had some very poor examples of development in the city over the years. I won't name them, but poor quality housing estates that try to ape the kind of Georgian ideal and fail dismally, in my view. And then we have some outstanding examples of innovative architecture. And I always highlight the Holborn extension, which I know people love it or hate it, but I think it is a wonderful example of how you can meld the old and the new. You have to think really from the developer's point of view in terms of what they will put on the site. And maybe this is something Geoff is slightly more expert at than me, but for a private developer, it's all about profit. And for a public sector development, it's all about containing cost as well, so that you get the product you want. And that's a really difficult mix. So, for example, to kind of show you the changes that are going on, when we took control of the council 2 years ago, we made a very early decision to take out all the gas in Bath Quays South on the big office block, so that building is now no longer has any gas to heat it. And that seems like a very prescient decision now, although we didn't know what was going to happen, obviously, at the time. And that building now has 20% of its energy supplied by solar panels on the roof that you can't even see. So this is the sort of thing we've got to do. We've got to build innovation into modern thinking, and we've got to have interesting architecture. I don't mind challenging buildings as long as they're interesting. And I think there are some really good examples in Bath where that has succeeded. But equally, I'm afraid there are some dismal developments which, you know, I have to look at every day and think, why did that get built? So, you know, I think there is a place for that mixed use.
The problem is that for too long, everything has been left to the market and to the maximizing of profits. And we don't really think about a value, to give value to a public good, yeah, to sort of think bigger. You know, we're talking about well-being economies. Geoff, I see on your on your panel for TEDx is Kate Roworth, and she talks very much about the donut economy, where all sorts of other considerations apart from making money are being considered as good for the economy and well-being, for example, and the well-being of citizens. And I'm very interested in the Future Generations Bill, so long-term thinking about future generations and their well-being. All of that has made way to, or has developed. Well, we've had too much short-termism and too much just sort of quantifying of direct commercial outcomes rather than sort of thinking a little bit bigger. And I think it's time, and I think the pandemic has made me think in that way too. It is time that we are considering long-term the public good, quite apart from the climate emergency. But, you know, a pandemic, nobody ever planned for that, although a lot of experts were warning about it. And politics in its short-termism, because of every 4-year election or so, just doesn't help, because people want to get re-elected. Hey, that's one of the things. But how do we build some sustainability and long-termism into politics? Very big question. Jane is asking, and I'm asking that to Geoff, what is actually preventing us from developing the Colonnades area by Pulteney Weir? It would be great for restaurants, etc. Is it a flooding risk? Geoff, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a very good question. I mean, some of the properties there are vulnerable to flooding in the 1 in 100 year scenario, but I know the council owns lots of the space there. I know there have been concerns in the past around road engineering concerns around the load-bearing capacity of some of the structures in that vicinity. But I think anything's possible, and I think I think we just have to see it as just an amazing opportunity for the future of the city, in the sense that it has the opportunity to tell the story of the layers of the city, right from the Roman riverside to the riverside of the future. It has that. It's one of the few places where you can get really close to the river safely in Bath. It's one of those places you can look down on in the city centre. And I think they're just, even in their most basic form of being allowed to offer access to people periodically, perhaps wearing high-vis jackets and hard hats, and just have a sense of hidden secret space in the city centre that could, from time to time, host events or exhibitions or pop-up events. I think there's a strategy there that could be delivered over time that takes them from where they are presently to something more meaningful and valuable in future. I've no doubt that they're a tough commercial proposition in their current state. Getting physical access to them as walk-by commercial units is very tricky. But I do think when you see what we have there, right in front of our eyes, right on our doorsteps, it's a tantalising site for the future. And I think we're so lucky to have it as an area to flex and an area to experiment with.
Richard, just very quickly, because you talked about the consultation, is there anything in the plan about the colonnades?
The problem with the colonnades is that the structure supports the road above it, and the structure is not in a great condition. And this is actually a common problem through the whole of the city. Everybody on the call early next year will see us having to repair the road surface on York Street, which is right next to the Roman Baths, and you'll be able to access from the new World Heritage Centre. A lot of Georgian Bath had its roads elevated, and so if you take York Street as an example, the ground level is 3 to 4 meters below the York Street level, and that's the original road level. And the Colonnades is a kind of similar thing. So the structure of the road above it is held up by iron and steel work, and it is in a very poor condition. And that's actually the barrier to the development. Because I agree with Geoff, it's a fantastic space. I've walked around it. If you can build a pyramid in the Louvre, you can make the Colonnades suitable. But what it requires is cash, and it requires millions of pounds of cash, because no private investor will take that risk. with the condition that's there. But one day it will have to be brought forward because it's a stunning space in the middle of the city. So money is the barrier, not will.
I think that's.
Sorry, Geoff. Yep.
I was going to say I completely empathise with that view too, and I don't think it's the kind of project that should be the responsibility of the council solely, and I don't think the council should be criticised or criticised for it not happening, because I think these kinds of projects are acts of guardianship for the city, where we all share the benefit potentially. And I think those undertaking ambitious heritage projects should be recognised and congratulated publicly for the brave investment and the commitment that people are putting into projects. And I see it in the Abbey project, where after 10 years, the team are so worn out of having the challenge of one of Britain's most complex conservation projects ongoing year after year, financial challenge after financial challenge, technical, logistical challenge. And in the end, getting a sense of embarrassment and frustration that the building isn't ready to be reused in the way that it was intended. But I think on the flip side, you see the team that, from the Abbey's perspective, who've maintained an Abbey open throughout that whole period, dealing with the spiritual needs of the city day in, day out. And at the same time, they're absolute champions in delivering the next 150 years of that building with the help of benefactors and agencies like the Lottery. But I think had more people been aware of it as it was happening and been invited to engage in it, I do think there would be more ambassadors and champions of the project in Bath right now. And so I think we need to do these projects together somehow. And we need to find a way to support and encourage each other to help realise some of the benefits and be willing to pay for them too, because we're the people that will benefit and pass on that benefit to others.
Well, it sounds like a lot of money. And Richard, I'm a bit worried to hear, that it holds up a whole structure of road surface above. I mean, is that the next Cleveland Bridge that's going to fall down? We really need to go to government and ask for money, or big lottery funding. I mean, this is what I said at the very beginning. Quite a lot of it is about the ability to raise money. And I hear you, Geoff, saying we need to raise more awareness, and there might be private benefactors. But I mean, we are talking about multi-million-pound projects, and probably with the best in the world, we can't sort of go cap in hand to our citizens in Bath. Please make all the contributions. Surely that's a big thing, a big ask to government ultimately. But let's. But the interesting thing is that these ideas are out there, and that plans are being put together, and coherent plans. And I think where we need to work together is with people like you, Geoff, who've got a vision, and with the council who says, yes, we want to do that, and with a whole raft of residents in Bath who say, yes, this is for us, is an interesting project for the future. So it needs to be many people, many parts of the city coming together and supporting that. Sue, it leads us into another question that has been asked by Judy in connection with a conference centre. Something could do we need a conference centre in order to be an attractive global city? And could that, for example, go somewhere, I don't know, right in the city centre?
Well, a conference centre would be very appealing, wouldn't it? I mean, I think the first thing to do is step back and think, what do we want it for? It would bring lots of people to the city, but that's already something that we're a bit nervous about because we get lots of tourists. It would enable us to run really big events, which would be fantastic. We just need to be clear about what events, because we run brilliant things up at the racecourse. Do we want them in the centre of Bath? So I think the building should come second after the brilliant ideas. And I think there are some fantastic ideas around that might make really good use of a conference centre. But I think we need to know what it's for, and why we couldn't develop areas, let's say, around the Forum to, potentially deliver an awful lot of the benefits without having to do a major build that would cost somewhere upwards of 80 to 100 million to do really well. I think let's look at what we've got and what we can develop. And then if there are gaps, we know where to look for the really big bucks to develop them.
So you're saying, yes, a conference centre, but maybe we just actually can use what is already there and repurpose it.
Yeah, or maybe we start by sort of saying, what do we want to happen in the conference centre that can't already happen in the rest of Bath? And make ourselves focus on that, what do we want, rather than what amenity would we quite like because we think we'll have a good use for it.
And let me say, we had a wonderful conference in the new Locksbrook building, an arts conference. I mean, you can host quite a lot of people there. It's again probably something where people don't know that it exists and it can be used. And that is always, you know, at the heart of a lot of stuff is communication, isn't it?
Yes, and you know, between the University of Bath, which hosts big conferences, and our site, which is just outside the city, so it doesn't kind of bother the city centre too much. We've got a lot of accommodation, we've got a lot of lecture theatres, we've got a lot of potential to offer things. And I think we'd be all, I can't speak for the University of Bath, but I am sure both entities would be really happy to support conferences that might want to be put on in the area, because that's the way that we bring business and interests into the centre of our thinking. But it's whether we want something enormous and sort of stately right in the middle of Bath, or whether we can do it with what we've already got, repurposing, reusing, and do it in such a way that we don't amplify Richard's challenges around traffic, footprint, tourist impact on a centre that can be a bit kind of top heavy with that already.
Something much more mundane, and I wonder whether I should put that question to the architect. And that question is from Maddie about access to the river when you do riverside developments. You know, why is it that often the access to the river, which is a beautiful city amenity, is so poor? Is there anything that you as an architect would say about that?
Well, my understanding in Bath is many of the issues about being unable to get close to the water are due to flood prevention engineering. So the river runs to Pulteney Weir, which in itself is a flood prevention device. You know, that beautiful horseshoe weir is a design and construction from the 1970s as part of flood alleviation. And then after Parade Gardens, the river is canalised, which means it's within vertical sheet piles on both sides of the river to enable the river to flow quickly and efficiently downstream from Parade Gardens further down, to make the volume of water flow as efficiently as possible. And that leaves us with the problem that the river level is often way below the path level, and it's more difficult to design and justify lower banks to enable the river to flood in areas which have either high commercial value or there are properties there at risk. So I think we're rather lumbered with it unless there's an even more ambitious flood alleviation scheme of the future, which can hold more rainwater upstream of Pulteney Bridge and the Bathampton Meadows, or there are other ways to provide alleviation for the capacity of the river. So I think we're rather stuck with it. But you can see some of the later developments, including at Bath North Quays and at Bath Western Riverside, where the riverbank has been dropped and landscape gets closer to the river, but it's normally protected by subsequent flood prevention measures or volume of water management measures either side. But I think it does leave us with Parade Gardens as a great opportunity where right in the centre we can get close to the river and enjoy it.
Thank you, Geoff. Richard, the next question I want to direct at you, this comes from Dick. This is about sustainability. The Japanese smart city of Shibuya has a development started in 2012 and lived in by 2016. It has 400 plus homes, each of which has an energy efficiency design and construction. They are linked together by use of integrated solar power, heat pumps, insulation, and socket for community-owned electric cars. Should a reimagined Bath have developments like this in the future? Well, who could say no? But how do we make it happen?
Well, again, I don't know that particular scheme, but that city. I'm assuming this is some kind of district heating and district energy conservation program of some sort. So you have to design that in when you are building what is probably a fairly large area of housing. I think that has been looked at for some aspects of the riverside along there. I think it's quite difficult in terms of the economics to make it work. And I think in principle it's a good idea, but I think we're all being challenged at the moment to think about what happens when gas becomes an unsustainable fuel. And I mean, the price increases have got very little to do with that really. But I think what's interesting about the current price shock is that it does bring you up short in terms of the reliance the country has on gas. I think I saw a figure very recently in the last week or so that 80% of British homes are heated by gas systems. Well, if that gas is not there because it's a carbon dioxide generator and it's being replaced by other systems, water source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps or just conservation measures, that has to be designed in right at the beginning. And I think we're only beginning to see developers dip their toes in that market at the moment, because it does add a lot of cost to developments. So I think the principle is good. It would be interesting to find out a bit more about that. So if the questioner would like to email me with a bit more details, I'll certainly look into it and talk to planning colleagues about how we could look at that.
So David Hall is asking a question around the sort of same topic, and I will now ask the architect. Do you have, Geoff, any comments on the specific challenge of future-proofing Bath's historic buildings by improving insulation and energy efficiency? So, what are the specific challenges of future-proofing Bath's historic buildings? Because we have to do something about insulation and energy efficiency, don't we? Even the old buildings.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think the first observation to make, and Richard mentioned it earlier, is to recognise the consumption patterns that we have today around energy usage. And firstly, we have to recognise, of course, that it's the people that use the energy, not the buildings. It's the people that choose to use heating and hot water systems and drive their cars and buy food from foreign countries, and carbon footprint is a personal thing, and everybody needs to work out what theirs is and to help plan together to deal with the climate crisis that we face. And I do think one thing about as a legacy of the pandemic is I think we have all realized that we are now in something together globally responding to the pandemic in the same way that we're in the climate crisis and needing to respond to it together, in the same way that we face the issues of Black Lives Matter and inclusion and diversity and social equity together as a society. So I think we're in a stronger position to think about it and take action. And we have to do it urgently, personally, corporately, and in the way we use our projects to educate people, to change their lifestyles, and to do that for the benefit of ourselves and each other and our children. That's the first thing, underlined 3 times. I think in a city like Bath, we then have the issue of having so many historic buildings together, and therefore needing to deal with refurbishment issues and home improvement issues on a mega scale. And I think we have to see that both as a necessity and potentially as an opportunity when we have such brilliant creative minds in the city, great technical designers, great universities that can help in that process, and I know they are. And I think for me, one of the two key things are firstly enabling the fabric of the buildings to be more airtight, and then secondly ensuring that the appliances and the primary heat sources, as we've mentioned, in future are sustainable and we're ready for them. But I do think, intriguingly, in Bath, where we have so many terraced houses, it's often the roof and the front and back facades, which are those that we need to deal with. And I do think in the front facades, we have these wonderful sash windows and we have window shutters. And historically, there's a tradition of having panelled rooms, all of which can contribute well to the thermal performance of buildings. And I'm intrigued by the possibility of the numbers of sash windows, for example, that we need to improve in the city to improve its thermal performance on a larger scale. And I think there's such ingenious contraptions, sash windows, designed to be both elegant and sophisticated in the way that they offer daylight and thermal comfort. But there's a really interesting project in the refurbishment of sash windows integrated with thermally efficient shutters and elegant design of rooms internally. That could be something really exciting for the future.
I mean, I don't want to dwell on this because there are many more questions, and I try to get as many as possible. But from a conservation point of view, is it really important how many centimeters are there in the frame? I mean, I sometimes question the wisdom of saying, oh, it has to be just so historically and true to what it was. But wouldn't the same purpose be achieved if you had the sash window, but it was double glazed internally, but it would mean a different width of the frame? I hear that often that those sort of things are a problem, and I'm puzzled by that. I don't understand that, because you've just said the whole idea about sash windows is that they're elegant. You wouldn't take away what they look like. They let in light. They will continue to do that, and they provide thermal comfort. By double glazing the whole panel, it wouldn't take that away either. So I'm always a little bit puzzled by arguments that I hear that our Georgian windows or sash windows can't be double glazed because it would mean it would be wide and all the rest of it. So that's my little challenge for you, Geoff, and I don't ask you to answer that now, but maybe I take that up with you in a private conversation. Sue, how can we genuinely engage the community in co-designing Bath with Northeast Somerset as a city/community of imagination?
Well, by events like tonight, for a start. I mean, there's always a challenge in that you've got some people who are doing most of the talking and some people who are doing most of the listening and thinking. But Bilsey is a brilliant institution for turning that round and hearing people. We always have events going on at Baspar University, but we've also been holding events like the one we held with Stephen Taylor, where we encouraged creative people to come and talk to us about imagining the future. I suspect that Penny and Kristin, whom I see here tonight, would be delighted to organise more of those events if people were interested, because all of this starts with a brilliant idea. And anybody who might have a brilliant idea, we need to hear, and we need to hear them really quite quickly. So we also start by just the usual invitation. If you have a really good idea, let me know about it, or let any of the friends and colleagues that you know in the room know about it, and it'll get back through the networks. And don't leave anything unsaid, because it's the unsaid things that we need to hear, I think, at the moment.
Well, Penny Hay says in the chat, yes, please. So she's on for it, Sue. Leading on from there, Funda is asking, what can we do to connect all the different organisations striving towards reimagining Bath so they can work together? So, not just the people coming forward, but, is it for the organisations? Is it for a lead organisation to bring everybody together? How do you see how this working together would operate?
Well, I think the council already does a huge amount to reach out to people, as you do, Vera. And I think the first thing is for everybody to get involved with those fora. It's the consultations that Richard was highlighting, but also the fact that my experience of Bath with North East Somerset Council is they want to hear. And they do listen to people, even though it's easy to imagine that they don't. In terms of lead organisations, Baspar is taking a lead in the sense of putting some financing into soliciting those ideas around culture, because that's really much at the heart of what we do. So as soon as we appoint that person, they will start to run a public consultation. And what I'd say is look out for them. They will obviously reach out to the institution, they'll reach out to the universities, through schools, through community groups. And rather than seeing an advert or an invitation for that and thinking, oh, that's nothing to do with me, I couldn't participate. Absolutely it's for you, and absolutely you need to participate. And different aspects of leadership, I think, are emerging from different entities in the city. And the critical thing is that we all work like a big, rich network. And I do believe that's starting to happen. I think the pandemic has speeded it up, actually, and we're much more integrated and in a listening mindset than we were in the past. But we've also got to start doing things. You know, Richard, when he was speaking, was talking about, you know, how that sort of slightly slower pace of life during the pandemic was really good for us. And I think I agree with that, but it also drove me nearly mad. And I think we really have to start doing stuff as well. And then we have to comment on what we're doing. And if we like it, we do more of it. And if we don't like it, we do less of it. And we learn by doing as well as talking and thinking and listening.
Geoff, here's one for you. And Sue has just been talking about, you know, it's our city and how do we reimagine it? And Jason is asking, does the fact that we welcome so many tourists and students mean that we are focused on being outward facing as a world-class city rather than focusing on making Bath an exciting, fun and vibrant place to live in for ourselves?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question and a good challenge. I think as Sue says, it's about listening and engaging everyone in the community in the solutions, because I think you know we firstly have to recognise that we're just so lucky and privileged to live in such a wonderful, rich, inspirational place that gives us the opportunity to live healthy, balanced lives, and to be surrounded by people that are also concerned with the city and concerned with the community and its progress. So I think we have every opportunity to work with each other to develop the city for ourselves as residents and stakeholders. I think we also have the opportunity to share that with Bath's visitors and those that live here for a shorter period of time, and also get the benefit of their contributions too. And although, you know, there are, you know, thousands of students internationally that study here or from further afield that study here, there are hundreds of thousands that have studied here in the past and have taken away very strong positive impressions of Bath, and I believe would be willing to come back and contribute in its further success, either periodically or as alumni of some of those organisations. And I think that's a real characteristic that we should draw strength from and draw inspiration from, as those that are here with the job of managing it and sustaining it.
Well, Philippa has asked several quite provocative questions. Thank you, Philippa. I know you well from the German Society. So you asked one of the questions, and I answered here because we're pressed for time. You said, can Cleveland Bridge be just closed for traffic altogether? And the quick question is no, certainly not in the short-term future. The problem, and we discussed that at a meeting with Wiltshire councillors last Friday, the problem is that the region has very few river crossings. And this one happened, and this is an important strategic river crossing. And unless you know, there's a regional solution, to the regional problem that we have around north-south traffic. Well, we will never solve the Cleveland Bridge problem, but currently, no. But we are hoping very much, and the council is working with Wiltshire, hopefully, more closely to sort of look at a regional solution. Obviously, we in Bath believe that strategic river crossing over a grade 2-star listed structure is not suitable for the long term. But no, we can't, it would be nice, wouldn't it? But it is a very strategic river crossing, and currently we can't do anything about that. We are coming sort of pretty close to the end of the evening. Richard, one last challenging question. Let me just find that one from, well, there's always the perennial question about trams in Bath, but one of the questions, let me just go through them, is about, in view of the COVID pandemic, this comes from Graham, the closure of Cleveland Bridge 2022 and the closure of the Cleveland Bridge 2022 is going to be very difficult for Bath and its businesses, and therefore should the council put on hold its ambitious plan for traffic and its carbon neutrality by 2030? Challenging question, Richard.
Well, the short answer is no. Cleveland Bridge will be open this side of Christmas. There will be, this administration is going to carry on with its transport plans. We've consulted widely on those. They have wide support, and we are going to implement them as far as we can in 2022. The climate emergency will not take a year off, I'm afraid. It's happening every year, and things are getting gradually worse every year. So no, we won't be taking our foot off the pedal. Can I just add something to the previous question though, about how people can make an influence? Very quick. Every one of you has a local councillor. Those local councillors are very close to the communities they represent. And if they're not very close and they're not responsive, then vote them out at the next time you get an election. I came into politics because my local councillor wasn't very responsive, and I decided I'd do something about it. But if you talk to your local councillors, they do feed that information up through the council, and they do have an influence. And they're there, that's what they're there for, to represent you, to articulate your views. So I just wanted to get that across. Find who they are and pester them. They won't mind.
Yeah, and democracy is indeed that you can change things by, well, it's every 4 years, and we have already mentioned all of that, that democracy can be bulky, but at the same time, democracy takes time, and to listen to everybody and to come to decisions or conclusions together as a community will take time. And of course, tonight, we have had many, many interesting questions. We had many interesting answers. I'm sorry that I couldn't cover them all, but I tried to be as fair as possible across the board of sort of picking the ones that reflected other questioners too. It leaves me to say a very big thank you to all our panelists. It was absolutely fabulous, and you've been grilled quite a lot. You know, the invitation to do more of this, come together to communicate, through discussion and deliberation, find what is best for our city looking into the future, is I believe the way forward. And I'm absolutely on for either physical meetings again, or conferences or Zoom meetings, where we continue to thrash out these fascinating but also complex problems for the future of our city. So thank you again to Bath Royal Scientific and Literary Institution for hosting this event, and for the closing remarks, I hand over back to Betty.
Right. Well, thank all of you for joining us at this public forum tonight, for your contribution, and especially to Vera and the panelists who have provided us with an array of thought-provoking views about how our city may develop. And we're particularly indebted to you, Vera, as MP for Bath, for your continuing support of the institution's programs. Thank you very much.